Welcome to the Westborough Lions Club's Living Well with Diabetes seminar. We've been planning this seminar for a few months now, based on the fact that there's an ongoing epidemic of diabetes cases going on right now, and we felt it was important to talk about not only what diabetes is, but how you can live well with the disease. My name is Susan Ash, and I am the Publicity and Communications Chairperson for the Westborough Lions Club. I think you'll find that there's something for everyone here tonight, whether you're here to listen about type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or if you're a parent or a family member or a friend of someone who's living with the condition. We're going to talk about food, what it is, why it's important for people of all kinds, but especially for people with diabetes, and what are the considerations and how best to handle different situations with food. We're going to talk about exercise, why you need to exercise. Certainly everyone needs to exercise, but for people with diabetes it's especially important. We're going to talk about what kind of exercise, how much should you do every day, what type of exercise should you do, and is there a time that you shouldn't exercise if you have diabetes? We'll talk about those kinds of things. The next section is going to be on technology, which is particularly exciting. We're going to be talking about new instruments for people with both type 1 and type 2, like insulin pumps and CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, bionic pancreases, new agents for type 2 diabetes. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Barton Center for Diabetes Education, which is a center that runs camps for kids with type 1 diabetes right in our own backyard in North Oxford, Massachusetts, and the Lions are particularly pleased to be involved with that camp program. We're actually selling raffle tickets tonight outside the door if you're interested to raise funds to send some local area kids to camp this summer. And at the end, we'll have a question and answer period that you'll be allowed to answer or ask any question that might be on your mind about diabetes, type 1, type 2, whatever. We will have a short question and answer period at the end of each segment, so when we talk about food, we'll ask for questions at the end of that. If we get too many questions, we might hold some of them or ask you to wait until the very end so that we can get through the whole seminar this evening. We don't want to keep you out too late. So, without further ado, and I feel that I need to give you a little of a commercial break about who the Lions are and what we do, because sometimes I think people don't really know how active we are in the community. The Lions have been around for just over 100 years. We celebrated our centennial back in 2017. Sorry, I keep going out with this microphone. And we are actually the largest service organization in the world. I don't think a lot of people know that. In Westborough, we're not the largest club in Westborough for sure. We're only 12 members strong, but we're mighty. But there's actually 1.4 million members across the world in 46,000 clubs. There's about 50 Lions clubs in central Massachusetts. And we're operating in over 200 countries. And our motto is we serve. And I think most people might be familiar with the fact that Lions are involved with sight. Back in 1925, Helen Keller gave us the charge to be Knights for the Blind in the Crusade Against Darkness. And ever since then, we've been working very hard to eradicate preventable blindness. We also help with hearing-related needs. And, but wherever there's a need, there's a Lion. So if there was a natural disaster, if there was a fire and someone needed something and there was no one there to provide it, the Lions come in and will help find or get what they need. And like I said, even though we're small in Westborough, we have thousands of Lions behind us in Central Mass and Massachusetts and internationally that come in and help not only manpower-wise, but financially. So we're a pretty robust organization. And obviously, because diabetes robs people or can rob people of their sight, the Lions are interested in raising diabetes awareness and prevention and education. There's over 30 million Americans who are, and adults and children who are living with diabetes. That's 1 in 11 people. That's a lot of people. And there's 84 million Americans who have prediabetes, meaning that they have elevated blood sugar levels. They may not even realize that they're elevated, but it could already be doing damage to their bodies. So it's important to have people screened for diabetes probably on an annual basis. And there's a lot of dire statistics that you can read up there about, it causes the death of over 252,000 Americans each year. But tonight we don't want to focus on all those horrible things. We want to talk about living well with diabetes, because there are so many people who are living with the condition. And you need to know that, if you are living with diabetes, that you're not alone. There's some pretty famous people who have diabetes that you may not be aware of. On the type 1 side, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor has type 1 diabetes, as does British Prime Minister Theresa May. And Chicago Bears former quarterback Jay Cutler, and Olympic swimmer Gary Hall Jr. I mean, these people are outstanding in their fields, and they're certainly not letting diabetes get in their way. And on the type 2 side, we have people like Tom Hanks and Drew Carey and Sherry Shepard, Randy Jackson, Billie Jean King, all living well with diabetes. So if you have diabetes, you're in good company with these folks. But without much further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker this evening. We were going to have Kendra Magyar from the Barton Center for Diabetes Education. She's an amazing woman. She's a nurse practitioner and a certified diabetes educator, and she is the health services director at the Barton Center, and herself lives with type 1 diabetes for over 30 years. Unfortunately, she had a family emergency and is not able to be here this evening. However, we are not going to have any interruption in our program because we have Dr. Laura Alonso, who is just an amazing person who is working locally at UMass Memorial as an endocrinologist and sees patients for diabetes. She also is running a lab and is Associate Professor of Medicine and Director of Beta Cell Studies at UMass Medical School, right in our own backyard here in Worcester, and is head of a research lab studying pancreatic beta cell regeneration. So we certainly couldn't have a more excellent speaker to talk about diabetes this evening. So we'll begin a very short discussion about the difference between type 1 and type 2. Most of you probably know what that is, but we figure that's the basis for our discussion tonight. So without further ado, Dr. Alonso.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you all hear me? It's not too loud. All right. So I'm really excited to see everybody here tonight. And I'd like to just get a sense before we start, how many of you guys are here in support of learning more about type 1 diabetes? Okay, quite a few. And how many type 2 diabetes? Quite a few as well. Okay, good. So I think the program is pretty balanced. Kendra was going to talk about all the type 1 stuff, and so she made her slides, and I'm going to do my best with them. But I do have a lot of experience with type 1 as well as type 2 in my clinical practice. Okay. Would you like me to leave this up?
That's all right.
Okay. If you have any burning medical questions about your own health, you should speak to your own physician. Okay. So what is diabetes? So diabetes comes in many forms, actually. We've talked about type 1 and type 2, but there's actually a number of different ways that the human body can get diabetes. But they all have some things in common. The body either doesn't make enough insulin, or the body's cells don't respond properly to insulin, called insulin resistance, which is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes. So what insulin does is it basically helps move glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells so that blood sugar can be used for energy. Of course, when you eat food, that's fuel that your body uses for energy. Insulin is really important for that process. And if insulin isn't working, high blood sugar develops, which is the hallmark of diabetes. And what that means is that cellular energy levels are low, and when the blood sugar is high, then the kidneys actually don't process it, and you lose sugar in the toilet, which pulls along with it water, and so dehydration is an important acute complication of high blood sugar. And then the long-term damage to the body called complications is what happens if the blood sugar remains elevated for months and years. And so this is really what we're trying to avoid, is any damage to the body. Okay, so what is the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disorder. That means the immune system is fighting against your own body. It's not supposed to do that, but unfortunately sometimes it does. And in diabetes type of autoimmunity, the immune system destroys the cells in the pancreas that make insulin. And so therapy for type 1 diabetes basically is insulin. Unfortunately, people have to be on insulin, so we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. Type 1 diabetes usually happens during childhood or young adulthood, but actually it can be diagnosed at any age. Even into your 80s, you can still get type 1 diabetes. It's more common in childhood. And it is the most common type of diabetes in children and adolescents, although with the obesity epidemic, we're seeing more and more adolescents which actually have type 2 diabetes. That's new. And the root cause of the immune attack is still not known. At UMass, there's actually a lot of scientists that are working on trying to understand why do people get this immune reaction. But it's actually controversial and not understood. So type 2 diabetes, this is the kind that usually occurs in adults. Most of diabetes in the United States and around the world is type 2 diabetes. And this is the kind of diabetes that is associated with being overweight and inactive. Actually, both type 1 and type 2 are genetic in origin. They run in families, although it's not, there's not a single gene that causes either of them. There are these sort of combinations of factors throughout the genome. Okay, so type 2 diabetes usually includes some amount of insulin resistance, meaning the body doesn't respond to insulin as well as it should, and there also has to be insufficiency of insulin, so the pancreas just can't keep up with the increased demands of the body. And therapy for type 2 diabetes, as opposed to type 1, where insulin is the therapy, there are many different medications, and often lifestyle change might be all you need with type 2 diabetes. Okay, no matter what kind of diabetes you have, management of this is a balancing act. And a lot of things go into keeping it all together, including the types of food you eat, the activity level, the blood sugar checking, medications, and it's a lot. I know you can't read this, but Kendra put this in here as a just incredible list of all of the different things that can affect the blood sugar. Because you're trying to read that, I can see these are food type related issues, medication related issues, activity and exercise, biology things like allergies and celiac disease, smoking, environmental exposures, behavioral decision making. So it's really complicated, especially for people with type 1 diabetes who are trying to get their insulin dosing exactly right. So don't be hard on yourself if it's difficult. Okay, so now we're going to start into the food section of the talk tonight. So what is food and why does food matter for diabetes? So food, of course, is what we eat. This is actually what your body's made out of. If you think about it like that, it's really important what you put into your mouth because it's the building blocks of your whole person. Food comes in different macronutrients, meaning carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, and micronutrients, which is vitamins and minerals. And a major contributor to type 2 diabetes is when the quantity of foods ingested exceeds the body's ability to process the nutrients. So in addition to the type of food being eaten, the quantity of food relative to the body's needs plays a really important role. Okay, so what foods raise the blood sugar? Well, the first one is probably evident to everyone. If you consume sugar, sugar goes into your stomach and your intestine, it gets into the bloodstream and it raises the blood sugar, because sugar is sugar. So with people with diabetes in general, we recommend to eat as little as possible of simple sugars. Unfortunately, sugar is not just candy bars and sugar cubes in your coffee, but it's even things like fruit. Sugar can even, natural sugars that are not different than added sugars when it comes to ability to raise the blood sugar. And then what really becomes very difficult, I think, with diabetes is the carbohydrates. So starches, or any macronutrient that's carbohydrate, mostly bread, rice, pasta, and potatoes, these starches are broken down into sugar in the body. And so the more carbohydrates you eat, the more sugar your body has to deal with, and the more insulin your body needs for that. And if your pancreas can't keep up, then the blood sugar may be high. Now, I'm not advocating a ketogenic diet, meaning total abstention from sugars or carbohydrates. Although there are some people that might say that that's a good idea, I think most of us agree that some amount of carbohydrates is important. in the diet. But in general, in the American diet, the quantity of carbs tends to be higher than we need. And the idea is to replace high carb foods with lower carb vegetables, proteins, and healthy fats. So what about fats? So I don't know, I see a lot of people that look like you're from my era, and we were taught that fat was bad. And we were taught about the food pyramid, and at the bottom of that food pyramid, there's a lot of carbs down there. I don't believe that this is currently believed by most people to be the healthy way to eat. I think it's generally accepted that we've really had a kind of a sea change in how we think about fat. And foods that are considered to be heart-healthy fats are now welcomed in the diet. In particular, what that means is oils that are liquid at room temperature, like canola oil and olive oil, nuts and seeds, heart-healthy fish, such as salmon, tuna, and mackerel, and almost any fish, avocado. So fats actually don't directly raise the blood sugar. Fats do not get converted into sugar directly. However, fats are dense in calories, so if being overweight or obese is part of your diabetes phenotype, then having too many fats in the diet can be problematic if you are gaining weight because of that. But if you reduce the carbs by adding some fat, that can help you feel like you've eaten something that was good and can help keep your insulin requirements down. Okay. All right, so what are we supposed to eat then? So I think a healthy eating plan includes vegetables, some amount of whole grains and dairy, lean meat, poultry, fish, beans, eggs, and nuts. A diet that's low in saturated fats, definitely low in trans fats. You know, in some of the world, they've completely eliminated trans fats, and we here in the US still have trans fats in some of our foods, but you don't want to be eating that. Because it's definitely will cause heart attacks. Not for diabetes, it's just not good for you. Low in cholesterol, low in sugar. And then the tricky part is to eat food that stay within your daily caloric needs, because if you eat more calories than your body's using, then that will lead to storing those calories, which means gaining weight. And then I'd like to point out also that in so many of my patients and people that I know, there's this reward sense that's associated with unhealthy foods. And I don't really know where that started, and I guess I'd like for everyone in the audience who would like to make any changes in their diet is think about what does it bring you when I eat foods that are not good for me. And maybe it might be something incredibly important, a link to your grandmother, and it's really meaningful and you want to preserve that. Or maybe it's not that important, and actually after you finish that bag of Doritos, you actually didn't feel that good. And so if you think about what is this bringing you, it might help you get hold of some of the maladaptive behaviors that when you grab for the Doritos, it feels like you're doing something good for yourself, but in fact, it doesn't add up to anything good. And also, I have a number of patients who tell me that they don't cook and they feel cooking is a burden, or it's a behavior they don't like, and then they feel like they don't want to cook. And hopefully that doesn't apply to anyone here, but I think that also requires some looking at, because this is what your body's made out of, and this is you taking care of yourself when you plan what you're going to eat, and you get the food, and you prepare it, and you sit down and eat it. So I would like to reframe food in this country away from maladaptive, reward-type driven eating and towards self-care and self-respect and preparing food and enjoying good, healthy food. Okay, all right. Now we're talking. Now this is more with respect to if you have type 1 diabetes or type 2 and are dosing insulin based on your carb counting. So this doesn't apply to most people with type 2 diabetes, but so these are some tips from Kendra on how to count carbs, and this is not to be, this This lecture tonight is not a replacement for sessions with a diabetes educator, nutritionist, for detailed information on carb counting. But there are some important things to think about if you need to know how many grams of carbs you're about to eat in order to determine what your insulin dose should be. One is the serving size. So if one serving is a half a cup of pasta, then this clearly is not a half a cup. So if you're going to estimate, you actually need to measure, which is super cumbersome at first, but actually you don't have to do it forever. You do it a few times, and then you could get a better sense of the meals you normally eat, how much carb is in them. And there's an app for that. There's actually a number of apps that help with identifying how many grams of carbs are in different foods. These are just several of them. What's on the right here is some very helpful tables that you probably can't see, but you could find online, basically using the hand to estimate volumes of things. So a fistful is about 1 cup, actually a rounded fist. If it fits on the palm of your hand, it's about 3 ounces, for example, of chicken. Handful of this, if you cup your hand, that could be about 1 ounce of nuts or raisins. 2 handfuls would be 1 ounce of chips, popcorn, or pretzels, something lighter. The volume of your whole thumb might be 1 ounce of peanut butter or cheese. Just the tip of your thumb might be about 1 teaspoon, for example, of cooking oil, mayonnaise, butter, or sugar. Okay? So there are ways to estimate how much, the volume of food based on your hand. Okay. And then getting a good grasp of how many carbs are in what you're about to eat is complicated. And then beyond that, there's actually more things that go into it. So if you look at a food nutrition facts label, you'll see that the total carbs on this label are 18 grams, but that actually includes 2 grams of dietary fiber, 1 gram of sugar, 12 grams of sugar alcohol. And actually, not all of those count 1 for 1 as carbs. So the fiber is a freebie. You can just subtract that from the carb count. And the sugar alcohol actually counts only as half. So these 12 grams would only count as 6 grams when you're counting carbs. Okay, fat and protein also change the equation somewhat, and it's not because they are carbs or change into carbs, but because they change how your body handles the carbs. So especially fat, if there's fat in the meal, that delays the absorption out of the stomach and the intestines. And so it basically slows the glucose absorption, and then it doesn't immediately enter the blood and then go away right away. It's sort of longer exposure, so you need a little bit more insulin if there's fat and protein involved in the meal. Okay, what about diabetes and alcohol? There are some risks associated. The principle, and this is mostly related to people who are on medications that also lower the blood sugar, such as insulin or some of the pills for type 2 diabetes like glimepiride, glipizide, glyburide. So alcohol on top of those medications can lower the blood sugar too low. The reason it does that is it prevents your liver from making glucose. So the liver actually stores sugar, and it's the main source of sugar when you haven't eaten overnight, or even if you didn't eat the next day. And to keep your blood sugar normal. That's a healthy way to restore the blood sugar. But if you've had too much alcohol, your liver may not store any sugar. And that can last for up to 24 hours. And glucagon, which is a rescue medicine for people with type 1 diabetes on insulin, that acts to bring up an emergently low blood sugar. If the liver doesn't have any sugar in it, glucagon won't work. So that's probably the main risk of combining alcohol with diabetes. Also, of course, it will impair judgment if taken in excess. So you might not recognize a low blood sugar as easily or know exactly what to do. So it's best to avoid alcohol or limit alcohol intake if you do have diabetes. And there's ways to plan ahead. So have food with you. Avoid a high carb meal or sugary drinks. That, I think, is part of the other risk, is if you have impaired judgment as you're drinking alcohol, you have way too much sugar, that could be a problem. You should have a way to check your blood sugars, especially before bed and overnight. If you have a continuous glucose monitor, wear it. And you might actually want to reduce your insulin doses if you know ahead of time you're going to be drinking alcohol. Very importantly, the people around you need to know that you have diabetes, that you're at risk for low blood sugar, and they should know how to treat that. And wear a medic alert bracelet so that if you do pass out and somebody finds you, they'll know what's wrong. Okay, that's everything that we have so far on foods and food-related things. Do you guys have any questions? Yes?
What about eating more frequently during the day instead of just having 3 meals, like snacking? Where does that fit in?
So the question is about snacking during the day. That is a great question, and different nutritionists will tell you different things on that. I'm not a believer that you need to eat 6 small meals a day and separated by 2 hours. I feel like my patients that try to do that end up eating more. It just ends up causing people to eat more. There is no diabetes regimen that will result in low blood sugars if you don't eat that. If there is, let me restate this. If your regimen results in low blood sugars without you eating, then you need to talk to your doctor and they should fix the regimen that you're on, because it shouldn't cause low blood sugars if you just skip a meal. Yeah, so I don't think you need to eat regularly. Also, in the past, related to that, some people were told that they had to eat a bedtime snack. And this is totally not necessary for most people with type 2 diabetes. It's only relevant, I think, to people who are taking bedtime insulin. We used to have insulins that would actually peak in the middle of the night. Those are mostly obsolete at this point, so most people aren't on those. And I think, again, if you need to take a snack before bed to avoid a low overnight, then something should be changed around in your regimen. Yes?
I've been told that people that have gastroparesis to eat more frequently. And you were just saying for regular diabetes to eat normal. What are your thoughts on eating, maybe 6 smaller meals instead of 3 regular meals?
So diabetic gastroparesis is a really important other concept that's actually not in here anywhere. So what that means is nerve damage from diabetes that slows the motility of the stomach and intestines, and so the food absorption can be really delayed. Under those settings, I think it's probably harmful to eat a larger meal. Probably it'll be processed better if it's a smaller meal. So you're right, that might be one setting in which eating smaller meals might be better absorbed. Thank you. Yes?
Can you explain the part about taking less insulin if you have alcohol?
Yeah. Okay, so that's trying to, so the question was about taking less insulin if you have alcohol. And the point of that is if you're at risk for having a low blood sugar overnight. Honestly, that was one of Kendra's slides. This isn't something I normally recommend to my patients, although if they have low blood sugars related to alcohol, then I would suggest that. It's not advisable to just skip your insulin if you're planning to go out drinking. So I think for me, reading into that, what I would say is if you have had a history of a low blood sugar after having alcohol and you're on insulin, then perhaps you ought to reduce maybe by 10% or something the dose of insulin.
I'm just trying to figure out how that equates, because every time I think of alcohol, I think of the sugar in it.
Yeah, well, that's another really important point. So if you're out drinking daiquiris, margaritas or something, yeah, you probably need a lot more insulin because there's a lot of sugar in that. Beer, of course, has a lot of sugar as well. Actually, I had a patient this afternoon who told me if he drinks 2 beers, he notices his blood sugar drops. If he drinks 3, it goes up. I don't know. So, yeah, I think it's something that needs to be looked at carefully with your individual doc. All right, any other questions? Oh, yes.
What's the best time to check after eating? Like
Blood sugar?
like
We're going to get to
one.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to get into checking. Actually, I think we're doing exercise first, and then we'll get into all the gadgets and all that stuff. All right, so let's talk about exercise. Is that okay? Yeah, if there's more questions, we'll do it at the end. Okay, so there are many, many benefits of physical activity, and this actually goes for everybody, whether they have diabetes or whether they don't. So it helps you maintain a healthy weight. There's data actually for all of this, scientific studies, that you feel happier, you sleep better, your memory is better, your blood pressure will be better controlled, the LDL or bad cholesterol will be lower, and the HDL or good cholesterol can be raised. This is one of the few things that actually can raise the HDL cholesterol. And for diabetes, it helps control the blood sugar and actually can get you on less medication. So all of that is good. Okay, up until, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, it was pretty much dogma that aerobic exercise was the kind of exercise that was useful for weight loss and for managing diabetes. We now know that both aerobic and resistance exercise are really beneficial, and they're beneficial in different ways. So for aerobic exercise, or actually the total goal is about 150 minutes a week, or I'd like to say really 30 minutes every day is a healthy amount. And you can break that up in aerobic or resistance exercise. So aerobic exercise needs to be of high enough intensity to make your heart rate increase, and you should be breathing hard. A simple, really slow walk with a dog doesn't really cut it, unless it's 20 degrees outside. Resistance exercise strengthens muscles and improves balance also. And muscles are actually really important in diabetes because that's where most of the sugar goes. This is where you want your sugar to go. If it doesn't go into muscles, it's going into your fat. And so the bigger your muscles are, the more sugar you burn during the day and the night. Muscle is good. And also you should know that people with diabetes lose muscle mass every year. It's basically like accelerated aging. So you want to be working against that to maintain your muscle mass. So both types of exercise, aerobic and resistance, lower the blood sugar, lower the A1C, improve insulin action, and also reduce cardiovascular risk. And the most effective is a combination of the two. So they don't have to be, you could spend your 30 minutes with a 20-minute brisk walk with the dog and 10 minutes of bungee cord in front of the TV, or push-ups and sit-ups, or squats and stretching, things like that. Ideas for exercise. I'm sure you guys all can come up with many ideas, but running, walking, swimming, cycling, dancing, playing sports, weightlifting, plyometrics, anything that gets your heart rate up, gets you sweating a little bit, and or builds muscle. Okay, so what about exercise and weight loss? You might not know that, and this is mostly geared towards type 2 diabetes, but of course people with type 1 are not immune to weight gain, and in fact now we have many patients that have real type 1 diabetes but are also overweight or obese. So weight loss can be important for anyone who's overweight or obese, no matter what type of diabetes you have or don't have. So if you have diabetes and it's associated with overweight or obesity, you don't have to get back to your prom weight. Simply losing 5%, 5 to 7% of your body weight actually can have a really major beneficial impact on your diabetes and metabolism. You probably want to know what's the best diet. We have the Mediterranean diet, we have the Atkins diet, we have there's so many diets, low carb diet, low fat diet. It turns out that they do study after study after study, and in unselected groups of people, the diets all seem to work about the same, and the only deciding factor on whether they will work for you is whether it's sustainable. So you basically need to find the type of diet that you like to eat and is long-term best for you. And that is what will be the most effective. Exercise is really important, not only for losing weight, but also for it's especially important for maintaining weight after weight loss. Again, combination of types of exercise. If you've never exercised, you should have a medical safety assessment to make sure that your heart is not about to have a heart attack before you embark on a brand new exercise plan. And if you are trying to lose weight, I think the maximum recommended is about 500 kilocalorie a day energy deficit, which is about 1 pound a week. That's the fastest weight loss that we would recommend. Okay, and here are some helpful exercise tips. Find a kind of exercise that you like. Start small. Find a partner. If you do this with someone, you're much more likely to keep it up. Pick a goal, like a 5K, or I have a patient that walks half marathons. Schedule it into your day. Time is definitely one of the biggest problems to defeat in the battle against non-exercise. And then feel the power growing in your body. Feel the benefits that this is bringing you, and enjoy it. Okay. So people, especially people, again, on insulin or on medications that can lower the blood sugar too low, can actually have trouble with exercise because of low blood sugars. So if that applies to you, this does not apply to people with type 2 diabetes on most medications that don't cause the blood sugar to drop too low. So you want to be able to check your blood sugar before, during, and after exercise. And again, you may want to reduce your insulin doses. If you know that every time you get on the treadmill, your blood sugar drops, and then you get really frustrated because you have to eat. You're there because you want to lose a few pounds, and then your exercise is making you eat. That can be quite frustrating. So you may want to set what's called a temp basal. That means a temporary basal on your insulin pump. We'll get to that. Basically lowering the insulin rate. You may have to do that a couple hours before you're going to exercise. If you're just on injected insulin, you might want to decrease the long-acting dose, although this is practically difficult to do unless you're exercising every day. These are other tricks with the pump. You may want to increase the target blood sugar for correction or decrease the mealtime insulin for the meal before the exercise. And you may need to eat a snack before the exercise, but if you're trying to lose weight, again, that can be frustrating. And you always, however, if you're going out exercising, you should carry glucose tablets or some sort of correction in case you do have a low. Okay, what about hyperglycemia and exercise? So if the blood sugar is too high, we call that hyperglycemia. And this is really specific to type 1 diabetes. So ketone bodies are what can happen if a person with type 1 diabetes doesn't have any insulin in their body. And it can happen actually if they get sick or on initial diagnosis when they didn't know they had diabetes. It's frequent at that point. Or if their insulin pump malfunctions and no insulin's going into their body, for example, the ketones can go high, and that can make you quite sick, and you actually require hospitalization. So if your blood sugar is high and you're going to exercise, you actually want to check for ketones first, because if the ketones are high already, you don't want to exercise because that exercise will make that worse. So if you have ketones, and that's usually tested, there's now blood strips or urine strips to test for ketones. You should not exercise, you should take your insulin, you should drink plenty of water, get some rest, and call the doc if it doesn't get better. All right, that's all for exercise. Any questions? Yes?
Go over what you just said. That last thing about the ketones.
Oh, okay. So ketones. All right, so go over what I just said was the question.
I do go to exercise, jazzercise every day.
Oh, good.
And I'm supposed to take my blood sugar. What happens if I take my blood sugar and it's, 170 before I go to exercise? What did you say about checking the ketones?
Yeah, so if you go every day, and if that's a blood sugar that would be normal for you and you haven't been sick, you don't need to do anything different than you ordinarily would. But let's just suppose you've been sick, you've been maybe even vomiting, you didn't really eat, and then you didn't take your insulin. insulin, as well, and then it's just not the right time to go exercise probably. Anyway, most people probably wouldn't even consider that. But so if you're sick in such a way that you think you might have high ketones, you should check your ketones before going to exercise.
And how do you check your ketones?
Oh, there's urine test strips is what we normally use, and there's also a meter that you can check for ketones, but usually the urine test strips are what we use.
But you're talking about if we're just sick.
Yeah.
So
It's
if
sort
we're
of-
feeling great, we can't wait to go, and
I would not advocate checking ketones under those.
Okay.
Yeah. That's correct. Okay. Yes.
Maybe two quick questions.
Yeah.
Ketone level, what is considered high on a ketone level?
That's a good question too. So ketones aren't really numerical. They do like 1+ to 4+. I think trace ketones or just a little bit is probably not too much of a big deal. But if it's, 2+, then you should slow it down. All right, so let's move on to technology. Okay, so this, I recognize you can't see this either. Okay, so this is a timeline. It starts with the 1920s, and now here we are in the 2000s and beyond. And this is to point out that before 1920, we didn't have insulin. That's actually an amazing story all by itself, how they discovered that insulin was made in the pancreas, and then they were able to isolate insulin from the pancreas of dogs. And before that time, if you had type 1 diabetes, the therapy was called the Allen diet, which was, they called it thrice boiled vegetables. So essentially, you could eat nothing. People lost a lot of weight, and many people died. And that was actually, by the way, really the only kind of diabetes that was mostly recognized, because type 2 diabetes was kind of a disease of affluence that happened later. But this was this devastating disease of children that would be perfectly healthy, and then all of a sudden they would start losing weight and do very poorly. So in the 1920s, they started with insulin, and that completely changed the world of medicine. And then not much happened. So in the 1960s, they had the first insulin pump. This was the size of a backpack. And then it wasn't until the 70s that they had a glucose meter to test the blood sugar. And then things have just wildly improved since then. And we're living in a time right now of a really amazing technology advance that I'll get into in a moment. So checking your blood sugar. Okay, so who should check? And when should I check? Actually, believe it or not, it's controversial as to who should check their blood sugar and diabetes. There was just an editorial by this guy in Indiana in the New York Times, I think it was last week, arguing that people with type 2 diabetes don't need to check their blood sugar at all. I personally don't agree with that. But for sure, anyone taking insulin needs to check their blood sugar many times a day. Anyone who's at risk for low blood sugars, and that depends on what kinds of medicine you're on. Anyone whose blood sugars are not well controlled needs to be checking their blood sugar. What is the target range? So, and this is Kendra's slide, she's put here before meals 80 to 130. The tightest range actually, so women with gestational diabetes, that means women with pregnancy and diabetes, we actually want them 80 to 100 before meals and not go much above 130 after the meal. So that's the most extreme level of control we recommend, and that's for the health of the baby. So I normally tell my patients 80 to 110 fasting before a meal is the perfect range. And after the meal, within 2 hours, it should be less than 180. That's the goal. When should I check? And again, this totally depends on what kind of diabetes and what kind of therapy you're on. If you have type 1 diabetes, you should check it between 4 and 10 times per day. I agree with that. Before meals and snacks, because you need to know how high your blood sugar is to calculate your insulin dose. Before bed, sometimes in the middle of the night. And for many people with type 1 diabetes, these recommendations are now obsolete because we have continuous glucose monitors that can read out the blood sugar all the time. In type 2 diabetes, it really depends. So if you are diet controlled, so you know you have type 2 diabetes, but you went on a lower carb diet and your hemoglobin A1C is under good control, that's the 3-month blood test to see whether your blood sugars are too high, then you might not need to check your blood sugar at all. But if you have type 2 diabetes and you're on multiple medications and your last A1C was 8.2, which is a little too high, the goal is under 7, then you definitely need to be checking your blood sugar because you need to know if you need to work harder on getting your diabetes under control. And if you're type 2 diabetes and you're on insulin injections or you're having low blood sugars, you may need to be checking just like this. Okay, so she's got here, what is considered a bad blood sugar? I forgot to ask Kendra what she meant by that. What is considered a bad blood sugar? First of all, I don't actually think of blood sugars as bad. I try to dissociate the meter from a judgment on your personal status. So I guess anything that's outside of the range is not a goal and should prompt some kind of intervention. Does that answer your questions? That's all I have on blood sugars. Okay, good. All right, so now continuous glucose monitors, and I have to say that from my perspective as an endocrinologist, this is absolutely amazing. So the Guardian, Dexcom, these continuous glucose monitors connect up with insulin pumps and can be extraordinarily helpful in figuring out what settings the pump should be set at. So the way these work is there is actually, all the components are not here, but there's a little pod of some sort that usually attaches to your belly somewhere, and it's got a little tube that's in the interstitium, meaning it's going into the skin and it's just sort of hanging out in the fat under your skin, and it's reading the blood sugar every 5 minutes. And then this beams the information out to a device or your cell phone or your mom's cell phone or whatever it might be. In fact, I've had patients tell me they don't want one of these because they don't want their wife to see their blood sugars. So these two are really commonly used with insulin pumps. And then this Freestyle Libre, this is a new thing. I mean, they're all pretty new, but this one has got this little disc you just slap on your arm, and it's good for 2 weeks, and you don't even have to calibrate it. And it just beams out your blood sugar to this device. So I have a lot of people with type 2 diabetes who are asking about this because they're tired of pricking their finger, or also these things are super helpful because they'll alarm in the middle of the night if your blood sugar is dropping. Or if you're exercising or whatever. Unfortunately, they're also expensive and hard to get. And in fact, I think I only have one patient who has actually successfully gotten this. So we have a lot of work to do on the insurance, coverage front to make this more accessible. But the technology is really, really impressive. Yes?
Typical cost, price, or each of those three?
I have no idea for these. For this one, I know because I've just been through this with one patient, and he, I believe, is going to pay $270 out of pocket every 3 months.
So you rent?
No. So these little things are once every 2 weeks. It's a 14-day sensor, and then there is this maybe I think 70 out of that 270 might have been a one-time cost. And for these, I don't know. I mean, mostly it depends on what the insurance will cover.
Yeah.
Okay. Insulin pumps. This is too small to see as well. So there are a large variety of insulin pumps on the market, and the marketplace is changing regularly, and this technology is evolving really fast too. So this one here is the Medtronic 670G. This is an insulin pump that talks directly to that Guardian CGM that I was mentioning before. And it actually has, this is the brand new on the market as of, I think, last fall, or maybe it was a year ago fall. Still feels new. It can connect to the CGM, and actually your current blood sugar can direct this insulin pump to secrete more insulin or less insulin. So they have closed the loop, meaning it can basically adjust the insulin infusion rate based on the blood sugar. It's not smart enough to do meals, so you still have to count your carbs and tell if you're going to exercise. In fact, this one I think has been a problem for some of my patients who exercise, and the thing is too smart, and it thinks you're going to need more insulin, and then in fact, I don't know, you could crash. But overall, this is quite good. The T-Slim, this is the one that talks to the Dexcom CGM. This does not have, at this point, an automated basal insulin infusion like this one, but this one can shut off the insulin infusion if the blood sugar is dropping. So that's also quite useful. The Omnipod, some people like this because it doesn't have any tubing. So all of these, the insulin is stored in the big device, and then you've got a tube going into your body with the insulin. This Omnipod, the insulin's actually in this little pod device, so you have got the little insulin pod there, and then you don't have to have a device connected to your body by a tube. Okay, so until there is a cure, the technology, like I said, it's really been making really great advances. The terminology is closing the loop. That means you've got the blood sugar information continuously, and you've got the insulin going in continuously. And the hard part actually has been the algorithm connecting those two, because as you can imagine, it has to be absolutely perfect. It cannot ever fail, because if it accidentally gave too much insulin, that could be a really devastating problem. So I think that's been a big problem, a big barrier, but I think they're pretty close to solving that. These are on the horizon, hybrid closed loop systems that Kendra was going to tell you about. The clinical trials are ongoing. And actually, you might be interested to know that there are bi-hormonal closed loop systems that are in testing. That means insulin as one hormone and glucagon as the other. So that means if the blood sugar is dropping, the pump can give you a little bit of insulin to really restore the blood sugar and avoid a low. I think that the literature is uncertain as to whether we will actually need this. The glucagon's been a big technological barrier also because it's not stable once you resuspend it in a liquid solution. So the shelf life of the glucagon hormone has never been as good as the insulin. Okay, so what about medications for type 2 diabetes? So that was all on insulin delivery, which is mostly for type 1. So we have a lot of tried and true meds, metformin being the A#1. It's been around since the 1950s, and we know it's safe. In fact, its safety profile has been improving with time. Now we know that it's actually safe with a certain degree of kidney failure, which it used to be thought was not safe. Sulfonylureas like glyburide, glipizide, glimepiride, these are also pills that lower the blood sugar. These can also lower the blood sugar too low, and so they're sort of falling from favor, although they're pretty effective, so a lot of people are still on them. Pioglitazone, that has also fallen from favor because it makes people gain weight. So we don't see too many people on that anymore. And then many people with type 2 diabetes are on insulin, both long-acting forms and short-acting forms. What is exciting on this on the medications for type 2 are the newer meds, and this is really in the past 10 years. We have 2 new categories of medications that actually help people lose weight, so that's been really exciting from the endocrinologist perspective. So these GLP-1 agonists, which you've probably heard about, Byetta, Victoza, Trulicity, Ozempic, Bydureon, these are injectables. This one was twice a day, this is once a day, and then these guys are all once a week. And what they do, I think mostly act at the level of the brain, is what the science says. And they basically tell you that you aren't as hungry as you really thought you were. And so people lose weight with these, sometimes quite a bit of weight. And it also helps the insulin secretion profile. So these are in wide use. And then the newest is these SGLT2 inhibitors, which basically, these guys, basically help you pee sugar into the toilet. So you basically eliminate glucose by excreting it from the body, which turns out to have a lot of benefits besides just losing some sugar in the toilet, because we just last week had the second study. There was a major study a couple years ago showing that Jardians actually reduced the risk of heart attacks in people who had had a heart attack by almost 40%. And now the same exact result was found with Farxiga. So somehow these guys, by eliminating some glucose in the urine, switch the body metabolism to fats, and which is very healthy for the heart and heart failure. GLP-1 agonists also, in addition to the weight loss, are cardioprotective, and these guys also protect against kidney damage from diabetes, it turns out. So really the medical advances on the type 2 side are exciting. Okay, now we'll talk about a little bit of research. So I do spend only 1 day a week in the office, and I spend the other 4 days or more on my research lab. And we're studying the pancreatic beta cells. So if you think this is a pancreas here, it's nestled in the duodenum, and if you zoom all the way in, you find these little clusters of cells embedded in the pancreas that are called the islets. That's I-S-L-E-T. Of Langerhans, and that's where the beta cells are, pancreatic beta cells, and those are the cells in the body that make insulin. So that's where all the insulin comes from. People with type 1 diabetes, it's these cells here that are destroyed by the immune system. So there's several approaches to trying to get to restore them. So the holy grail would be to regrow those beta cells. Then you wouldn't need all the injections of insulin and checking the blood sugar and all that. So that's the goal of many scientists around the world. So islet cell transplantation is one way to do that. That actually is like organ donor. It's like any other organ transplant, like a liver or a kidney. So if somebody dies and they've donated their organs, specialized centers around the US and the world can isolate the islets and then infuse them into the liver of someone with type 1 diabetes. And this is somewhat effective. It's not a therapy you've probably heard of because it's still investigational. And the main problem with this is that you have to be immunosuppressed. And so those immunosuppression medications actually have a lot of side effects. And so actually the therapy is maybe as bad as the disease itself. So it may get better as the immunosuppression gets more targeted, but I don't think this will ever become a mainstream therapy for diabetes. And also, of course, you're limited by donor availability. Thankfully, we don't have lots of donors. So, but these did show proof of concept that if you take islets and you add them to a person with diabetes, their diabetes gets better. So we know that if we could make more beta cells somehow, that would be good. Whoops. You may have heard a lot about stem cells, and there's a huge push trying to make beta cells out of stem cells. So what I'm showing you here is this human pluripotent stem cell. So this means, pluripotent means many, potent. So if you start with a human pluripotent stem cell, that means these are cells that can form many different cell types depending on what instructions you give them. They're now, actually, Doug Melton is a famous scientist just down the road at Harvard who has, he and actually several other groups have found sort of the magic sauce over time to take, so you can get these cells out of a skin biopsy. So in theory, you can take a person with type 1 diabetes, do a skin biopsy, get these pluripotent stem cells, and then grow beta cells that are exactly matched to that person. So this is getting better. And then you could aggregate them into islet-like clusters and transplant them into people. There are actually clinical trials ongoing doing this. The main problem is that people with type 1 diabetes, their immune system will kill them off. So you have to somehow protect those transplanted cells. And so I read grants from chemists, and all kinds of people coming together trying to find the best way to coat these things so that, of course, they have to be able to be in contact with the blood to sense the blood sugar and for the insulin to get out, yet protected from the blood. So I don't know if this will ever make it all the way, but there are a lot of different people and small businesses working to try to make this a real possibility. And then there's what I consider the pie in the sky, and I'm really a scientist at heart, and I'm interested in understanding, the fairly basic biology of this. Can we regenerate the actual beta cells inside someone's pancreas? This is what I would love to be able to do. At the moment, it's science fiction, so don't get your hopes up. So these pictures are from my lab. In green, we've stained for insulin, and in red is BRDU, which is basically marking cells that are entering the cell cycle. So these are actually human beta cells that we had engrafted into a mouse to study them long term. And we found that we could actually induce them to enter the cell cycle, which that already is a big step because people thought it wasn't possible. However, we don't have anything that would be a safe therapy at this point for a human being to take. But that's the goal. And there are many people working on that as well. All right, so that's all I have in technology. Any questions? Yes.
You were saying for type 1, the beta cells, transplants, the islet cells,
Yeah.
don't work because it would be killed off if they put it in those regenerated
Yeah.
cells. Would a transplant of a pancreas be, would that work?
That's such a good question. So the question is, what about pancreas transplant? Does that work, and would the immune system still kill off the beta cells in a transplanted whole pancreas? And I'm really glad you asked that. You're asking questions that are not in here, but they're really good questions. So pancreas transplant does work. Those beta cells can still be destroyed by the immune system, but usually pancreas transplant is done also for someone who also needs a kidney transplant. So if you have diabetes and then your kidneys fail and you need a kidney transplant, you need a transplant. That's it. So you're going to be on the immunosuppression anyway. That immunosuppression will solve both problems. It'll solve your immune system killing off the engrafted kidney and pancreas, and it'll also stop your immune system killing off the beta cells in there. So for people who have another organ engrafted, and usually it is a kidney, they do what's called kidney pancreas. They can do KAP, which is kidney after pancreas, so they can do pancreas after kidney, or better is kidney and pancreas from the same donor at the same time. Yes?
It's just too risky just to do a pancreas transplant.
For some reason, the pancreas alone doesn't engraft as well. I think the graft survival is not as high. I don't know why. I don't know if anyone knows why. You don't see that done very often. It's a good question. Pancreas alone is the question. Anything else? Should we keep going? So the last few questions are about support. So this is emotional support systems. And again, unfortunately, so these are Kendra's slides, and some of this I actually know less about. But so diabetes is really hard, and diabetes is one of those things that doesn't go away. And it's okay to go on a diet for a short period of time or whatever, but when it's the rest of your life, sometimes that can just feel like a lot. So support is really helpful. There is a thing, it's actually an entity that is studied called diabetes burnout. And it's really important to have a sense of community. It can be empowering and motivating to talk to other people with diabetes, other people supporting people with diabetes. And there's actually a lot of places to look to find support. Diabetes clinics. In fact, I just received an email this week about St. V's in Worcester. They have a Walk with a Doc, which is a sponsored diabetes exercise program. Charitable organizations such as the Lions Club, an excellent place to look. The Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, Children with Diabetes, College Diabetes Network, the American Diabetes Association, the TCOYD, which you'll have to look up because I don't know what that is. Family and friends, and this is important too, is educate people, talk to people about how hard it is, tell them how they can help. Avoid blame. A lot of diabetes is so hard because people feel like it's their fault. But this is a genetic disease, and there's only so much that you can do, and really you need help. There's also, if you're online, there's lots of online communities that can be helpful. The Barton Center, so the Barton Center is this amazing camp for children with type 1 diabetes. I have never been. I've heard Kendra talk about it, and I've heard other people talk about it, and they describe this just unbelievable time where for once in their life, you know, when all the kids go and eat a meal and they all check their blood sugar and they all take insulin, and it's perfectly normal to have diabetes, and it's the only time in their lives they've ever experienced that, and it can be really life-changing. And then camp itself, there's actually lots of benefits of camp for kids: time management, critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, active listening, initiative. There's many, many things here. Camp is good. And the only way to have friends is to be one. That's from Kendra. I think we're done. Yes. I will introduce this, I guess. So we covered a lot of stuff, but not everything, and there are some really excellent online resources that you can look up. The diabetes.org, this is the American Diabetes Association, has excellent information for patients. This is the CDC, you know, the same CDC that does infections, whatever. They have a whole website on diabetes. The NIDDK, this is the branch of the National Institutes of Health that funds my research, but they have also a whole website on patient things for diabetes. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. We want to give you a little rest. I'm going to make a few announcements and a few acknowledgments, but we'll have Laura come back to make herself available for some final questions. I'm Angelo Cavalieri. I'm the president of the Westborough Lions. I have a few thanks and a few acknowledgments I'd like to make. First, I'd like to thank the Westborough School Department for making this venue available to the Lions, and also the support they gave us for setting everything up for us. They did a wonderful job. I'd also like to thank Westborough Connects, who, among other things, connected us to Dr. Laura, who, before I forget, is a Mill Pond parent. So she is very familiar with this location. She has 2 children in Mill Pond right now, so she is truly a Westborough resident. We have managing anxiety in school at home, interrupting worry cycle. That's again Wednesday, April 3rd, and that will be at Westborough High School. And again, if you look at the URL over here, you have the westboroughconnects.org programs. You can get additional information, and you can also register for those events. The Lions on June 22nd will be having our annual charity tennis tournament. This is our, probably right now, our largest fundraiser for the year, most consequential event. And this is the venue that we use for providing the funds to send children to diabetes camp. We try and send at least one person each year for a week at these camps. And you can support this event by making a purchase of a raffle ticket outside in the lobby after this event. So with that, I would like to thank all of you. You have there's our web address, there's our email address. You can like us on Facebook. And one final note is that next month, the Westborough Lions will be celebrating their 25th anniversary of being chartered here in this town. And we are proud about that, and we're happy to be able to serve this community for 25 years. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Laura for one last set of questions.
Are insurance plans typically pretty good funding medication, and some of those administered tools you recommend?
That is a very, very, very important question, and the answer is uniformly no. So some insurance are better than others. Private insurance tends to cover more than public insurance, although not always. Mass Health actually covers quite a lot compared to some of the other insurance. It is always a struggle, and they always put up a fight. So we have staff in our diabetes office where their whole job is submitting paperwork for prior authorization. You know, I'll send the prescription to the pharmacy. There's layers of problems. So when I'm sitting with a patient, I can't tell what's covered. There's no indication anywhere. So we will pick a medication. I will send the prescription, get no feedback right away. The pharmacy will then send eventually a paper back to my office saying this needs, well, first they go to the insurance, then it, gets denied or whatever. Then they send a paper to my office, they fill it out, then they put it in my box, and then I sign it and fill it out with some more things, and then it goes back to my staff, sends it back to the pharmacy. Well, actually, I don't even know if it's going to the pharmacy or the insurance. And there may be more than one round of that. And often at the end of all of that, there may be, well, it's approved at a tier 2, and so then the copay is going to be $70 and the patient can't afford it.
So what happens in cases where either it's rejected or it's approved for a percentage that the patient can't afford?
Yeah.
Where do they go for either medication
Yeah.
or if they need some of those tools to administer?
Yeah.
What do they do?
It is a big problem. So I will say that actually one of the heroes in this whole story is Walmart. And I never thought of Walmart as a place that I was excited about, but Walmart sells insulin. It's not the fancy schmancy, most modern kinds, but you can buy it for $25 a vial. It's not even prescription, it's over the counter. Regular insulin, that's the short-acting, and then NPH insulin is the long-acting. These are a little bit cumbersome to use, but actually, because of the coverage of insulin, we've been talking a lot about this and reviewing the studies. And it actually, for people with type 2 diabetes, there's essentially no statistically provable benefit of the expensive insulins over regular and NPH. For people with type 1 diabetes, there is a statistically provable benefit of the more modern insulins in reducing the risk of low blood sugars. But for most people, actually, you could get by with a $25 vial of insulin. The GLP-1 agonists and the SG, all those, they're $700 a month. If you don't, if you're paying out of pocket, most people won't do that. Yeah. Yes.
Where does insulin actually come from? Do they make it in a test tube, or do they get it from any other?
Such a good question also. So in the beginning, apparently, they basically tied off the pancreatic duct of dogs, and it was this brown liquid, and they just injected it in the buttock. I mean, I've seen the lab notebooks from their experimental, and then of course in 1921, they would just do that in a kid, who was in the ICU. Couldn't do that anymore, but it saved their life. Then there was a period where they used cow insulin and pork insulin. And those were readily available at fairly good cost, but the problem was the human body would develop an immune reaction against those insulins. So I'm actually reading a book right now about how they cloned human insulin. So they were able to get the human gene for human insulin and put it in a bacteria. I believe currently it's made in yeast, actually, but it's made in basically large vats by a model organism like a bacteria or yeast, and then collected and purified.
So it's relatively cheap to make.
It's not, so it is a biological, which is, there's high standard. It's not like a chemical that you can just synthesize and put it in a tablet. So it's a little harder to make than that. But the patenting system for biologicals is different. You'll notice that there's not generic insulin. Well, there sort of is, but it's 80% of the cost of the regular insulin. And then they make modifications that improve the speed of onset, things like that are considered advances, and then they have 10 more years of patent on that. Yeah. Yes?
Do you have any knowledge of the new insulin, the fast-acting insulin? I've heard it's made by Novo.
Is it Fiasp? Fiasp, yep. So this is even more rapid-acting than Humalog and Novolog. And it's got a slight, it's subtle, but it is faster. I don't have experience with it in patients. I have one patient that we actually tried to get it and we couldn't get it.
Yeah, it was like $1,000 a lot.
I don't know how much it costs. Yeah. Maybe I can finish with a story. So my 12-year-old, in February, we were skiing, and he broke his collarbone, and we happened to be in France. And he, as I was telling these guys, he had to take an ambulance down, to this bottom ski resort, and then he saw the physician, and he had x-rays, and he had emergency pain medication, and he got medication to go home with. And then they apologized that we would have to pay cash for that, and the entire bill was $140. So there's something wrong. Yeah. All right. I'll stay around if anyone has questions they want to ask.